Well, welcome everyone. Good evening. This is absolutely fantastic. My name is Debbie Anglade. I am an assistant professor of clinicals at the School of Nursing and Health Studies here at the University of Miami. And as as a member of the Alumni Association, I would like to welcome you all to this a human face on our environmental health epidemic. We in the Alumni Association are truly inspired. We were inspired to host this evening's panel. The discussion by our alumnus, Alan Bell, who is a graduate with a Bachelor's of Business Administration in '76, Juris Doctorate in '79. His moving and inspiring story about how he turned his medical mystery into a mission to increase awareness of and overcoming the effects of exposure to environmental toxins. Alan Bell is an attorney who prosecuted organized crime cases for the state of Florida before being poisoned by his sick office building. He founded the Environmental Health Foundation, advocating for victims of environmental injury, and he founded the Environmental Health Foundation advocating for victims of environmental injury and teamed up with other top lawyers, including those portrayed in the films of Erin Brockovich and A Civil Action. We're all familiar with those two films. To help other environmentally injured victims in court, he penned the book Poison: How a Crime-Busting Prosecutor Turned His Medical Mystery into a Crusade for Environmental Victims. This book puts a human face on the toxic dangers assaulting us in our everyday environments. And as a former victim, survivor, health advocate, and legal avenger, Alan offers an aerial view of one of the most important global health issues of our time. And so please, let's welcome Alan Bell.
Thank you. Hello, everybody. Welcome, distinguished alumni, friends, students, and esteemed members of our panel that's going to be discussing this when we continue on in our program. And most of all, Trish, could you raise your hand for putting on this amazing event tonight? Alumni Association. For those of you who don't know, I've lived in California for the last 20 years. And I've come back to the University of Miami, my home, your home, to alert all of you about a silent epidemic that's happening in your own homes, schools, and workplaces. How many of you in this audience have family members that have cancer? Raise your hand. Keep your hands up. How many in your family has Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, autoimmune diseases, even osteoporosis? Raise your hands. Wow. Put your hands down. Well, I can tell you this, that you all are not alone, and that all of these diseases that I've just mentioned are environmentally linked. And you might want to ask, why is this happening? Listen to this. The women in this room, sitting in this room right now, 1 out of every 3 of you are going to get cancer in your lifetime, according to the American Cancer Society. And the men, we've got it worse, because 1 out of every 2 men sitting in this room are going to get cancer in our lifetime, according to the American Cancer Society. And children, It's the #1 cause of death, cancer, in the United States of America. And you might want to ask, why is this all happening? Here's some clues. Since 1950, over 85,000 chemicals have been introduced into our environment, and few have been tested for their toxic effects on humans. And as a result of this, according to the National Institutes of Health, 8 out of every 10 cases of cancer is caused by the environment that you're exposed to in your everyday life, in your home, your school, your workplace, and your community. And indoor air pollution, according to the Environmental Protection Agency, 75 million Americans become ill each year because of the sick buildings that we work in. As a result of this, more people get sick and die from environmental exposure than all those afflicted with AIDS, accident, war, and crime combined. This is the silent epidemic of the 21st century. And if this scares you, it should. And I see a few of you squirming in your seats there. Listen, the good news is it doesn't have to be, because this is preventable. If you arm yourself with knowledge, you can modify your lifestyle, minimize your risk, and prevent this from happening to you and your family. So the paradigm has shifted. Good health is no longer just about diet and exercise. It's also about what you breathe and what you touch. That's why I wrote this book, Poisoned. It puts a face on this global issue. And I used my journey, my personal journey, to illustrate how this is happening all over the planet. So here's my story. Let me get a little more intimate with you here. After I graduated from the University of Miami Law School, I became an organized crime prosecutor in Dade County, right here. I prosecuted organized crime, Colombian cartel rings, and the mob. Suddenly, I became ill. After the doctors did all these blood tests, they told me that I was poisoned. And the most likely candidate was the mafia. What they later learned was, it wasn't the mafia at all, but it was the sick building that I was working in. And it just so happened that me and my coworkers were working in a brand new building. New carpeting, new glues, new paints, all kinds of new ingredients. And we all got sick. In my case, I had brain injury, which I still have, and immune system damage, which I still have. And it caused me to become hypersensitive to everything in the environment: perfumes, colognes, hairsprays, automobile exhaust, newsprint. And every time I got exposed to these substances, I experienced grand mal seizures. In order to save my life, doctors told me, here right at the University of Miami, that I needed to quarantine myself away from all man-made chemicals. And the only place that they could think of was in the middle of the Arizona desert. So they airlifted me to a little 800 square foot bubble made of glass, brick, and steel. And outside this bubble, cactus, 50 miles in all directions. No roads, no schools, no people, desolate, isolated. And I ended up in this bubble, in a wheelchair, tethered to an oxygen tank, looking like a concentration camp victim. No hope of recovery, no way of getting out. But miraculously, there was a new treatment that came available, and it got me out of the bubble. And the first thing I did was I started a charity called the Environmental Health Foundation. And we raised money to find treatments and cures for all kinds of environmentally linked diseases. And to my surprise, some pretty powerful people backed what we were doing. Al Gore, who was vice president at the time, endorsed it. Gene Cernan, the commander of Apollo 17, and top university and governmental-based scientists all over the U.S. became a part of our scientific advisory board, including, yes, the University of Miami was on our board. Then, after starting this charity, I jumped back into the legal arena. And instead of prosecuting one crime at a time, I decided that I wanted to go after the ultimate crime, which is the crime against humanity which we are committing against ourselves. We are poisoning ourselves unknowingly, and it needs to stop. So I teamed up with other lawyers, as the moderator mentioned. I teamed up with a guy by the name of Ed Massery. Has anybody ever heard of the movie Erin Brockovich? Raise your hand. Well, Ed Massery was her boss. He was the lawyer. I worked with Ed on cases and going after big bad corporations that are poisoning people. And then I hooked up with another guy by the name of Jan Schlickman, another lawyer. Has anybody ever read the book or seen the movie A Civil Action, starring John Travolta? Okay. Jan Schlickman wrote the foreword in my book, and I also teamed up with him on a case in Fort Lauderdale involving a massive toxic tort case. So that's basically my personal journey, and that brings me back to the University of Miami, to our family, to all of us that have one common concern, and that is, I assume we all want to know, how can we best protect ourselves? That's what brings us here today. And I submit to you that it all starts, whoops, somebody left their keys here. Okay, I submit to you that it all starts with our students at the University of Miami. You guys, how many students do we have in the audience here? Okay, probably the rest of them are taking finals or whatever. But it's up to you students. We're passing the baton to you guys and you gals to take this to the next generation, because only you can reverse this. Our time is almost up. We're passing the baton to you. How about, do we have any nursing students here? Okay. Well, we have, she's representing the nursing school. It's up to our future nurses to improve the care of environmentally injured victims. It's up to our future medical scientists. Anybody from the medical school here? Okay. It's up to you to find better treatments and cures for diseases that are linked to the environment. How many is here from the architectural school? Raise your hand. And it's, okay, but it's up to your students to better design our buildings, to make them safer so they won't get sick. I know we have a prominent architect out here. Mr. Larry Beam has got to be out here somewhere, a primary architect, nationally known, maybe internationally known, and we're gifted with his presence here as well. Anybody from the law school, raise your hands. Okay. It's up to you students to do two things when you get out of law school. The baton is being passed to you. You need to push for stricter regulations so people won't be exposed to environmental toxins in their homes and in their schools and in their workplaces. And for the victims that have already become injured from these, it's up to you to represent them in court and give them a key to the courthouse so their injuries were not made in vain. So you students might be asking, that's a pretty big thing you're expecting of us, but not really. Because these esteemed professors that are going to be speaking here today, they're giving you students all the tools that you need to take this to the 21st century. They're the real unsung heroes here. The professors and the teachers that are teaching you this. So I'm often asked, a lot of people ask me, they say, how did you survive 8 years inside a bubble in a wheelchair tethered to an oxygen tank with no hope of ever getting out? And I must tell you all that a big factor in me being able to do that is when I was a student here at the University of Miami, I was taught how to overcome adversity. And you students that are sitting here today, you're being taught how to overcome adversity whether you realize it or not. You see, education is not only about scholastics, it's also about growing as an individual. So people outside this university, they may not understand it. It's a Keynes thing. Just look at our football team. 5 national championships, we'd never come back. Look where we are. We're back, right, Ben? That's right. So that's why I'm here. I'm here for 2 things. I'm here to challenge the university as a whole to become a world leader in the fight against environmentally linked disease. And I'm also here to encourage and inspire you students in your own way to make a difference when you get out of this school and help the fight against environmentally linked disease. And I'll submit to you, it all starts right here, right now. Thank you. Go ahead.
Wow. That was so inspirational. Thank you, Alan. That was wonderful. Thank you. Alan, as Alan mentioned, there are others here to partake in this exchange. And it is my pleasure now to welcome the additional panelists who are here with us this evening, along with Alan. So first, I'd like to introduce Dr. Deborah Franke. Dr. Franke is a PhD and is certified in AIA and NCARB. Does anyone know what that stands for? I'll tell you. American Institute of Architects and the National Council of Architectural Registration Board. So she is certified in those two, through those 2 organizations. She is the coordinator of the healthcare design programs at the University of Miami School of Architecture and the Botswick Design Partnerships Miami office director and healthcare planner. With 30 years of experience in the industry and a doctoral level specialization in healthcare architecture, Dr. Franke has mastered the translation of pre and post occupancy evaluation results into design guidelines, which optimizes operational efficiencies, clinical effectiveness, and user experience. Believing that design solutions and best practices are grounded in the rigorous pursuit of research, Dr. Franke continues to blend her practical planning approach and her passion for discovery. So thank you for Dr. Franke. So next on the panel was to have been Anthony Alfieri. Unfortunately, Professor Alfieri was called away. He is a professor of law at the University School of Law, but he was called away and unable to be here with us. However, he sent a number of individuals to represent him. It takes a number of them to represent him. So at this time, I'd like for the member representatives of the School of Law to come on up and introduce yourselves and share with us.
Hello, everyone. My name is Daniel Hales. I'm a 3L student at the School of Law and a fellow with the Environmental Justice Clinic.
Hello, everyone. My name is Kiana Courtney. I'm also a third-year law student, and I am a fellow in the Environmental Justice Clinic.
Hi, everyone. I'm Fitri Nugroho. I'm a 2L. I'm an intern at the Environmental Justice Clinic.
So welcome to you all. So next we have Ashley Falcone. Dr. Falcone is a PhD with a master's in public health. She serves as assistant professor at the Universities of Miami School of Nursing and Health Studies, where she teaches courses for the public health and nursing undergraduate programs. As background, Dr. Falcone interned with the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention and Hispanic Serving Health Professions Schools, Inc., studying the public health system and broader health issues on the U.S.-Mexico border. After receiving her Master's of Public Health in Health Education from the University of South Florida, she serves as a health education administrator and practitioner at the University of Miami's Herbert Wellness Center for over a decade, and received her doctorate in epidemiology from the University of Miami's Miller School of Medicine, where she focused her research on home-based strength training for post-operative breast cancer survivors. Dr. Falcone is currently involved in community-based efforts to increase physical activity levels among residents of Little Havana by reshaping the built environment. Welcome. Next, and not last, we have Dr. Naresh Kumar. Dr. Kumar is a PhD and is an associate professor of environmental health in the Department of Public Health Sciences and faculty associate of ABIS, Center for Ecosystem Science and Policy at the University of Miami. Dr. Kumar's research and teaching are dedicated towards preventing and managing environmental disease burden. And a novel aspect of his research includes engaging individuals and communities in preventing measures through a personalized, real-time environmental risk surveillance system. This system monitors and records environmental population in real time and informs the targeted users, such as asthmatics and COPD patients, about hazardous concentrations in real time through cell phones and the web. Dr. Kumar is PI on several federal funded grants from the NIH and NSF. His research on air pollution and health was featured in high-profile media such as Science Daily and Wall Street Journal. He currently teaches environmental health and methods of environmental epidemiology in the MD-MPH program, Masters in Public Health program, and PhD program. Dr. Kumar serves as a reviewer for NIH and NSF and has also is a reviewer for high-impact journals such as Environmental Science and Technology, Environmental Health Perspectives, and Public Opinion Research. So welcome to our panelists on A Human Face on our environmental health epidemic program this evening. So, are we ready? Yeah. Awesome. So what I'd like to do is to start us off by posing each panel member a question. So we'll start off with Alan. Alan, why did you write this book?
Well, I sort of covered that when I was up there earlier, but I wrote this book to put a face on this issue, to make people aware of what's going on in their own homes, in their own schools, in their own workplaces. Most people aren't even aware of what's happening. And for those of them that are, they don't know what to do about it. And the key is that the key is prevention. You could prevent this from happening to yourself and your family. If you modify your lifestyle, you can minimize your risk. That's why I wrote this book.
So what is your most important advice to people who want to protect their families from toxic chemicals?
Well, like I said, it's not just about diet and exercise. It's also about what you breathe and what you touch. So before you come into contact with any kind of a product, whether it's a building product, clothes, hairspray, a bed, paints, baby bottles, the list goes on and on and on. Read the ingredients. Become an informed consumer and look at the ingredients and make sure that you're minimizing your exposure when you go to the grocery store or when you go to purchase plywood at Home Depot.
Interesting. So now we're talking about the environment and how then we are to interact and become aware. So that takes us, I think, into the legal realm. And so let's, from the School of Law, what is environmental justice?
So the EPA has a specific definition for environmental justice, and that is the fair treatment and meaningful involvement of all people, regardless of race, color, national origin, or income, with respect to development, implementation, and enforcement of environmental laws, regulations, and policies. So essentially what that means is that we are going to look at how people are disproportionately affected and how people disproportionately have to share the burden of some of those different environmental factors, and whether or not that's actually just. And what we usually see is that people who are in the lower income communities and people who are of color are the ones that bear that burden. And so the Environmental Justice Clinic has a few projects that are classic examples of environmental justice.
Yeah, so one example is a case that we refer to as Old Smoky, which is what a municipal incinerator, which was sited in Coconut Grove, was called by the local community for obvious reasons. So it operated from 1920 to 72, and during that time it was used pretty extensively, and it's sited in a predominantly black community and historically Bahamian.
Right across the highway.
Yeah. Right across the highway, and it was shut down in 72 when they increased the height of the smokestacks, and the smoke could now move across to the white side of the Gables.
For old Gables.
Yeah. So anyway, so when you operate a municipal incinerator, you're burning just all of the byproducts of urbanization and development. So the things you've talked about, the things that you breathe, the things that you touch, the things that you don't necessarily think about as impacting your health. All of those things were affected by this incinerator. It was dumping arsenic and barium and other heavy metals and just toxic byproducts into the air. So these were settling on people's roofs, people's laundry, so the clothes they wear were infested with this, anything they touched in their community. And it was also buried in just under the soil in this community in what are now parks and schools. So if you go through this neighborhood, you'll see these sort of gentle rolling hills in places. We're in Florida. That doesn't happen unless you bury something there. That's where the toxic ash is buried. Still there. So that's one major issue that our clinic is working on, the Environmental Justice Clinic at the School of Law. And we have another case that's very similar.
So another case that we're working on is in Dunbar at Fort Myers. Basically, the city from 1962 to 1993 dumped lime sludge around the Dunbar area. And so without knowing that it's dangerous, the local people around that area played in the lime sludge. They call it orange slide, quicksand. They had fun with it. So, of course, until recently in 2007, the DEP found that the ground had arsenic and is dangerous to the community. And so what the Environmental Justice Clinic did is we did a community outreach to see the effects of the arsenic around the community, and we found out there's cancer clusters. So what we're trying to do now is to hold the city accountable to get medical monitoring claims so we can monitor this disease so that it doesn't spread even more.
Okay. Well, Dr. Kumar, we've heard of some areas within Miami and other areas that have issues. So what other environmental insults do Miami residents and even the UM community face today and likely to face into the future?
Well, why should we go to Miami per se? Why don't we go to our own campus where you're sitting today? Mm-hmm. How many of you use swimming pool, by the way? Our swimming pool. Our swimming pool, just right? When you go there in the evening, beautiful outdoor swimming pool, they don't use chlorine, right? But every evening when we go there to swim, we are breathing these nanoparticles, fat layers sitting on the top layer of the water. I complained this several times to the manager of swimming pool. They never bothered to clean it. And because it doesn't draw your attention, and secondly, it's not going to kill you right away. But if your child has asthma or allergies, perhaps one swimming in itself, you will have exacerbation, will be landing in ER. Number one, do you go to Richter Library by any chance?
Yes.
Have you ever bothered to think about and smell about if there is something different? Okay, so we illegally, being a faculty, of course you can fire me if you like. I monitored indoor air pollution in Richter Library, and there are lots of microorganisms, including mold spore, that are sprouting in Richter Library. They rarely bother to clean about it. Secondly, they sometimes pride themselves putting carpet in Miami. Miami is not a place to put carpets, because anywhere you have carpet and high moisture, like in Miami, you are creating a hell for yourself. So now when you talk about Miami, go to any other places. Perhaps, of course, you own a home or you rent a place or condo, right? Every quarterly you have insecticide and pesticide spray. Do you have that? Right? Otherwise, you will have lots of cockroaches and ants in your home, right? How often, by the way, do you open your windows after spraying these pesticides? 0 time, right? They cycle and recycle. And as a result, most of these are what we call endocrine disruptors. They are part of your air that you're breathing, right? Did you have a coffee or milk in the morning or cheese today? Did you bother to think about how many antibiotics or what concentration of a painkiller you consume today? Perhaps not, because there are lots of cheese sitting outside too. So we rarely pay attention to what Alan was saying, a wise consumer, right? But nonetheless, what Alan was making an excellent point, that unless we are wise, but how the hell in the world can we become wise unless we know what's in those products? Some of these will be in fine prints, number one. Number two, you cannot easily measure them. You cannot even measure your home air quality. Can you? Can you, any one of you tell me what is the level of CO2 in your home or volatile organic compound that comes in even this wax that you have? Just to give you another example, I will come back to this point again. We have wellness center, right? Other day, to maintain the squash court, they put wax on that. And wax has a very high concentration of, it's oil-based stuff, and it has high concentration of VOC. So really you want to go there for fitness, but not to make yourself sick. If your child has some airway disease, you will be landing up with exacerbation just playing for half an hour in that specific room. How many times you are told that when anytime you have VOCs or paint in your home, you are supposed to ventilate it or switch over to zero VOC product? You never. Perhaps you paint your home too, right? My research suggests if any of the home painted their home during the last 1 year, the chances of exacerbation of asthma in those homes was 44% higher. Wow. Right? So we are not aware of these things. So just coming back to these things, how really we know about these things? Don't we have technology? Of course, we have hell of technology today. Everything is on cell phones, right? For example, do you have fire alarm in your home? Certainly you do. If you don't, your insurance will increase, right?
Right.
Do you have a sensor that can monitor VOC or ozone? You don't, right? But these sensors are on market, extremely inexpensive, but they won't be mandatory by the insurance company, or anyone wouldn't like to invest even $10 for buying any of these sensors. Just to give an example, go to Home Depot. They sell a mold testing kit that costs you $7, right? You can't bother to put that mold testing kit to know how many mold spores are sprouting in your home, but you can go and buy a coffee or drink or a beer that costs you a lot more than the cost of this mold kit. So if you really want to make people aware of what they are breathing, what they are eating, and what they are touching, we need to know what the contents are and how toxic these are in short run and the long run.
Wow.
So talk about Miami. Pesticides are one of them. Last year we sprayed hell of Nailard in entire Miami to kill mosquito, and so did we this year too in southern Miami. So we are trying to understand, for example, for how long you should be indoor when you spray Nailard until it becomes intoxic to human, right? So pesticides are one of the major things in Miami. Number one, Indoor microorganisms is another thing. Thirdly, the paint-based or the insecticide, pesticide-based products, they are also extremely dangerous for you in Miami, because when you talk about air pollution, when I teach my student, I tell them, how is the air quality in Miami? Because you always think of Miami about beach, right? And beautiful beaches, right? Natural albuterol sulfate, sea salt that you breathe, extremely good for your airways, right? But in principle, yes, if I go by EPA standards, carbon monoxide, ozone, nitrogen dioxide, fine particulate, in Miami, air is 1,000,000 times better than the national standards. But when you talk about the disease associated with air pollution, asthma, allergy, or cardiovascular disease or cardiopulmonary disease, that burden is not low in Miami. How do you explain that? You are breathing hell of pollution indoor, many of the things, example that I gave you. So these are some of the few examples of many of the pollutants that we breathe in Miami, and most people don't know what they're exposed to, either in the food or in the water or in the air. So these technologies are there, and they are easily accessible. It's one of the part of the sensor that I have. My hope down the road is to replace people's fire alarm with these devices that can inform you some of these highly reactive compounds and their associated risk in real time, in short run and the long run. Sorry being late, too long, but anyway.
Not at all. That's wonderful. Lots of information for us to digest. And so, Dr. Falcone, from a public health standpoint, what steps can be taken to prevent harmful chemical exposure?
Well, in addition to just talking about being a conscious consumer, talking about more from a systems or policy standpoint, we talk about in public health more of an upstream focus. So, there's a famous parable in public health where you're talking about the person sitting on the river side and sees someone drowning and pulls them out. And then another person drowning and pulls them out, and another, until you just say, gee, maybe I should go upstream and figure out why they're falling into the river in the first place. So looking at our issues more from that standpoint, instead of being reactionary and trying to solve problems once people are already ill, when it's a little too late, focusing on keeping them healthy in the first place. So in environmental science, we talk about more of a precautionary principle focus, where we say, if something is, if there's a perceived harm associated with a policy or a product or a production process, whether we have scientific evidence of a cause and effect relationship, we should really reconsider whether we push these things through until we can confirm or not whether that harm exists. And then on top of that, that burden of proof really falls to the proponents of that policy or product or what have you. So it's their responsibility to show that this is something that's safe and allowable, so that we don't end up having issues later down the road. So through that, enforcing things like health impact assessments, so before policy goes through, really doing a thorough assessment as part of environmental justice, making sure that you're involving the people that might be impacted, the community members, so that you make sure that everything is safe from the start and you keep people nice and healthy.
Okay, well then, Dr. Franke, how can design improve our healthcare campuses and change them into community wellness havens?
So, very difficult after all I heard today. So basically, not a different perspective, but something, as an architect, particularly in the healthcare industry, it is important about the materials we use and all of that, but more important, I think, is how do we bring and bridge health and wellness to our communities. Hospitals are places where we typically go when we're sick, where we're afraid to go there. And there's been a new movement on trying to change, the healthcare campuses into what is called more of health districts. It's really about, not thinking of these places as, parking lots where you're just going there to get better, but as a way of life where these places start integrating other uses that can help the community to, for example, having community centers, having cooking classes, having all these things that can help you educate yourself in your lifestyle changes. So, you know, it's really, you know, it's sometimes difficult because depending on their location, and sometimes you are starting to see, for example, green roof gardens in a lot of these hospitals, a lot of the approach into integrating daylight into these spaces, and trying to also provide these great outdoor spaces where people can release their stress. But why not are these places not available for the community that lives near the hospitals? How can we not think of this as more of growing our urban centers and really trying to create that mindset of preventative health? So it's you know, it's things that are starting to change. Like, for example, if you go to the Louis Pope Life Center, there's a beautiful garden in front of it, you know, where you can really actually sit there and enjoy, even when you're going for a really terrible news about your family. But once you get out of there, it's almost impossible to navigate that campus. It's really, you know, crossing the streets, all the cars going by. So, you know, they don't integrate the community, you know, so the more that urban population has actually grown 12% since 2000 to 2010, which is higher than our population growth. So people are moving to urban centers, and this is going to help how we actually approach and integrate health in our communities. Even going beyond, you know, when I just met you, he said LEED, you know, it's a great certification. Well, WELL certification is a new certification that it actually picks up where LEED left off. And it's really about measuring, monitoring, and certifying the impact of the built environment on health and well-being. Very difficult thing to measure. But that is actually the drivers of that particular certification, and I think there's been maybe 1 or 2 buildings that have that just got certification. And it's really about the air we breathe, it's about the water we drink, it's about nourishment, it's about lifestyle, it's about mind. So it really integrates a lot more. So even though our environment may affect us just by, you know, the toxicity of the environment, it's also about our lifestyle, and it's also about all the things that we can enjoy, you know, even when we're going to a medical facility. So, you know, it's just part of our responsibility, I guess, as architects and more as a healthcare architect, to really think about the user experience and how that experience can actually also help their mind beyond their physical, you know, arena. So thank you.
Staying in, keeping on that topic of built, what opportunities can dead malls provide to improve health and wellness in our communities?
So we all know that, or we should know, that 20 to 25% of the malls are probably going to be abandoned in the next 5 years. So there's a big, you know, it's been a hot topic of discussion. I just participated in the South Florida Healthcare for South Florida by the Bisno Company. I also participated as a panelist in the CREW, which is the real estate group for women. And the topic was, what are we going to do? They gave all the statistics of all the stores that are going to close, obviously, because of all the things we buy online and how we less and less go out shopping. And, you know, the topic was brought open to see what can these malls become? Are we going to just have these blocks of cement abandoned everywhere? Or what can we start thinking about it? And actually last year, as part of the healthcare studio that I run at the School of Architecture, we actually explored that topic with the company Arquitectonica. So we selected 4 malls in the Miami-Dade County area, and we actually retrofitted them into some sort of medical facility. But the project was not only about learning about that particular facility, but what other things can, being that the anchor, be brought to that mall to actually integrate the community. Again, trying to promote preventive health. So if you have a rehab facility, what other kind of businesses can you bring there to promote people to go there? How can we connect some of these malls into the community so we can create more walkable cities? You know, if, for example, there's a lot of new concepts of daycare centers for the senior population. You know, they bring activity centers, but they're all the time locked inside that particular area just for the activity that they're going to participate. But what about other additional services that we can bring to that particular mall so they can get out, walk around beyond their activity that they just go to, besides seeing their doctor? Sometimes people sit there for hours or the 8 hours of the day because they really don't have anywhere else to go. So, you know, what other things could there be? You know, pediatric clinic with a daycare center for the senior together? How can we start bridging those, you know, the senior population with the younger population, and what are the things that we can actually create in these abandoned malls that could actually be completely redesigned to become different spaces? So the project was also run with Arquitectonica Geo, and they brought the part of the landscape architecture as part of the mall. So, you know, we had to think a little bit out of the box, though. Like, are we thinking that everybody's going to drive here? Or what is going to be the means of transportation as, you know, time changes? So how are going to be you know, communities going to be developed around these malls? Or are these going to be these freestanding malls in a highway? And then how can we bridge those communities? So really, urban sprawl, I mean, it's really changing. So we have to think how we change with time, and we also have to think that as things are cyclical, you know, before all these malls were popping up, now they're dying out. So what can we do rather than living in a city with all these abandoned structures?
And so our legal representatives, what is the distinction between the built and the natural environment?
So the built environment is just any place that humans have manipulated to suit our needs. So if we've changed something by building a road or anything up so that it is now no longer functioning exactly as it was before we got there, this is the built environment. So a dam that creates a reservoir lake, this is part of the built environment. A naturally occurring lake is part of the natural environment. So that's the distinction. And the interplay between those two isn't always extremely clear. So we can see some effects directly, other effects take longer to show up. So Old Smoky, a lot of the pollution wasn't immediately apparent that that's what happened. So just like with the Dunbar situation, we knew there was a cancer spot there, we know there's a higher incidence of all these things, but that direct line to that natural system, the part of the natural environment that is your body, from the built environment, from the byproducts of waste and all that comes from urbanization, that line isn't always easy to draw, and that's the difficult part for us as lawyers.
So Dr. Falcone, what are some of the challenges with establishing causality when looking at the health impact of chemical exposures?
Sure. So, you know, I talked about the precautionary principle, and obviously that's a lovely theory, that it's more of a theory than a practice, although it is practiced to an extent in Europe and locally here in the United States. But realistically, we more follow a polluter pays principle. So something bad happens, you know, then it's the polluter that has to pay for, you know, the health consequences of that issue. But, you know, when we have that situation, you have to be able to prove that, hey, this exposure caused these outcomes, right? So from a public health standpoint, that can be quite challenging, where we think about, you know, if someone was exposed to a large dose of something, someone was accidentally dosed with, you know, pesticides or a chemical exposure in an occupational setting, and it was a large dose, very easy to understand that was the situation that led to a disease, you know, that would be one thing, and even that can be challenging at times. But in many cases, what we're exposed to, like, you know, Alan said, you know, look, and what Dr. Kumar said, look at every single item you put on you or in you. You know, look at the ingredient list and all those things, and those are low doses of a ton of different, tens of thousands of chemicals that are out there that you might be exposed to, and really trying to measure those doses or measure the interactions between them. Those are things that we don't do well enough, or have a hard time really measuring well. And then on top of that, if you look at the outcomes, normally we're talking about long latency periods where people take years and years to develop signs and symptoms. And so how do you really make those connections so that you know over how many years, what was your exposure, how often were you exposed, at what doses, So it can be quite challenging. And then when you think about that from the, having to prove that evidence, and the legal perspective can maybe add into this, how do you prove this to make that polluter pay when they've done something to harm the human or the environmental health, right? So that's a huge challenge that we face when we talk about causality.
And so, Dr. Kumar, what are the most important challenges for addressing environmental epidemics?
What my colleague said, proving something is not that easy with respect to the long-term health effects of environmental pollutant. For example, when we were dying of infections in 1920s and 30s, one of the major things that we achieved was we came to know about microorganisms and we detected them, right? And starting from 1950s all the way to 1970s, we enacted a couple of legislations. And one of them is called Safe Drinking Water Act and Clean Water Act. And the goal of Safe Drinking Water Act, which is a federal legislation, was that if you put this water, drink this water in, from your home, it has to be safe. And one of the underlying idea was, before 1970s, we were exposed to many of the microbes, and we will get infection, and if you're not treated in time, what will happen? You're talking about counting your days are numbered, right? So that was that acute effect you will see within days to weeks to months if you are not treated with antibiotics, except there are a few anomalies. For example, HIV/AIDS, that's also infectious disease. But nonetheless, then we started introducing a host of chemical that Eleanor was saying, roughly 85,000 of them, and we have little to no idea about for most of them, although EPA is trying really hard, and so is NIEHS, National Institute of Environmental Health Sciences, trying hard to identify what are the exact doses of these chemicals that we are chronically exposed to in our consumer product, in medicine products, and other things. We have little to no idea about what will be the total quantity of effect and how many years will it take before they can kill you. The example I was giving you, if you are exposed to a mold spore or the fat that you're coming from the exhaust in the swimming pool, it's not going to kill you right away. It will take many years, including the pesticide that you have in your home and pesticides you're getting every day in your food, right? It will take many, many years. But that's not all. When we talk about, let's say, simply pesticides, I'm not exposed to just pesticides. I'm exposed to a million different things in different settings. I'm inhaling many of the things. I'm also going and swimming in the lakes and the waters and the beaches. There are many other contaminants I'm getting from there too. So my exposure is coming from air, water, food, and virtually a variety of contexts. Now, say you found that I was living close to a pharmaceutical manufacturing industry, but my disease is much more complex. Let's assume I develop a cancer, and I want to implicate that my cancer is largely because of this disease, but there are too many confounding factors and too many confounding exposures that I don't know about. Maybe there are two different people that have been living there. One developed disease, other did not. It could be individual behavior too. Just to give you an example, in one of my recent experiments, in which we injected some of these airborne particles, which are quite toxic, smaller than 2.5 micron, and many of them were heavy metals. One group was kept in the running environment where you have a rotary wheel, and larger case. Another was not in the exercise-rich environment. The exposure did not show as strong effect in the exercising environment. Now, what you're doing, you're cycling and recycling some of these pollutants in your body, so the distribution is now uniform in the body, and it's not targeting one specific organ in your body. Now, for example, when you are exposed to pesticides or hormonal growth, for example, through your dairy products or meat, for example, they will be latching on your fat tissues. And these fat tissues, where do you have the highest amount of fat tissues? Either you have in the abdominal or your liver or the brain, right? So when you don't exercise, they do not distribute uniformly. So the point is, one of the major challenges is that sometimes it's very hard to tease out the effect of many of these chronic pollutants that we are exposed to. And some of these effects may take decades to years. I'm sure most of you might know about Love Canal. So what we were hearing earlier, that it's very hard unless you begin to suffer, you don't pay attention. We are human-like animals. We learn the hard way. So the major challenge is, unless we put the burden on ourselves, think and examine what we are eating, what we are breathing, we won't be able to tease out what is causing disease, because there are too many things we are exposed to, starting from pharmaceuticals to drugs to pollutant in the home, from consumer industry. Even take the example of cell phone. Have you ever, I'm sure all of you have a cell phone, do you? When you bought this phone, did you ever read those fine prints? It says your phone must be 6 inches from your ear, and if you do that, you can't hear a damn. That's why they provide you. That's why they provide you a free earphone, so that these cell phone, you cannot sue them down the road. It's not the fault of this company that is giving you phone. It's your fault because you did not read those fine prints. Because it does create what you call electromagnetic field radiation. It has enough strength through energy and vibration of your cells that it may lead to some of these damage. We don't know these effects. There is a very nice documentary on CNN, if you can Google search and take a look at this. So the effects are not known yet. However, some of these in vitro, in vivo experiments do suggest even electromagnetic field radiation is harmful. The effect might take 20 years, by then too late. Sorry. So in other words, the effect do not show up right after the exposure, especially for most chronic disease. If it is infectious, yes, we can within days to week. If you have fever, right, or if you have pain, you right away take painkiller or fever reducer, right? But when the effect is not that severe, you don't pay attention. And these will be slow poisons that we are exposed to in every single day.
And so thank you for that. And lastly then, Alan, last question of the panel. What are some of the facts that most people don't know about toxic exposure?
I think most people don't realize that our government is not protecting us. They're not protecting us. In the United States, as a general rule, chemicals are presumed innocent until proven guilty. So what that means is, from a practical standpoint, the Chinese could bring in all this toxic drywall into our country. Our babies could be drinking BPA-laced baby bottles. They could have
Or the lead-based
toys, diapers, cribs. The list goes on and on and on. And this is in contrast to other countries like Germany, France, and even Canada, where the laws are much stricter that won't allow this kind of stuff from happening. So that's one thing that we're not aware of. And like Dr. Kumar said, the effect is very elusive with these exposures. It's elusive. It's not like someone walks across the street and gets hit by a car, they're injured, they get taken to the hospital. We know who the wrongdoer is. It's the car that hit them. In this case, as Dr. Kumar has said so eloquently, from a scientific point of view, is that it's a cumulative effect and it's also delayed. And when you're exposed to all these environmental toxins over years and decades, when you get asbestosis or you suffer from any of these other chronic illnesses like cancer or autoimmune diseases like we spoke about early on in this talk, you have no idea how you got it. And when we talked about the ingredients on the products, did you know that in the United States, consumer products are not required to display the ingredients on their bottles? Home cleaning products, there's no ingredients on them. I was just on KTLA, it's a big news station in Los Angeles a couple of weeks ago, where California just passed the first law in the country that made it a requirement to disclose all the ingredients on consumer cleaning products. And that's what needs to happen throughout this country, but not only with consumer products, but with everything across the board, whether it's the toys, whether it's the toxic Chinese drywall. I mean, the Chinese, they're smart. They send it right over here and we take it. There's other countries that won't do that. That needs to stop. So those are some things that and the thing is what we don't also understand is a lot of people say, okay, we understand that we're exposed to these poisons, but what are you going to do about it? What are you going to do about it? I mean, we don't know where it is, when it is. The heck with it, we'll just enjoy our lives. Well, there's a lot of things that you can do. If you educate yourself, you could make yourself aware of all of these things and where there's poisons and where there's not poisons and stay away from them. Modify your lifestyle and minimize your risk. This is preventable. If you arm yourself with knowledge, you can modify your lifestyle and you can minimize your risk. And if you look at consumer demand and supply, look at Whole Foods. Their stocks are going through the roof. Amazon just bought them. Consumers, mothers want to know how to protect themselves and their families. That's why they shop at stores like Whole Foods, because the products that are there, the ingredients are displayed on them. And this needs to happen on a global level, not just in Whole Foods. So my message is that there is an answer, and there are things that you can do about it to protect yourself and your family.
Outstanding.
Can I add a couple of points here? I think you are saying an excellent point. For example, whole food, right? If you buy poultry, for example, or meat, most of them will say they are not hormone treated, okay? That's one great thing. But nonetheless, even whole food, if it is organic, happily you will say organic. And if it is not organic, they won't say pesticide and how many pesticides. They say conventional, beautiful, right? Both same tomatoes, and both look exactly good. Perhaps conventional, which has GMOs, and also perhaps lots of pesticide and fertilizer. It may be looking more elegant because you have given lots of extra things to this, and you have also enhanced its shelf-life. But nonetheless, coming back to this, how can you really reduce your effect? Because what I'm saying is, yes, our life has changed dramatically. There is no way to go back to tribal societies, okay? So what can you do? So what I'm saying is exposure is inevitable to many of these pollutants. What can you do? The key is, first thing what Alan was saying, learn about what is in there. Number two, you can reduce your effect. One of the things that I teach my student in environmental toxicology class is not the exposure per se, how much dose you are getting. Just one example. So you are passing by a parking garage, lots of nitrogen dioxide, and if it is sunny, maybe higher ozone too. If you reduce your breathing rate to half, right? You cut your dose to half. Number one. Number two, let's say if you start running, what I was saying example earlier, all you're exposed to, you can counteract or reduce their effect. Number three, consuming less is one. For example, once in a week, if you cut, say, fasting, for example, in many of the cultures, there is a fasting, right? Mm-hmm. If you don't eat food, for example, or switch over from dairy product and meat to maybe more vegetable, so you have reduced half of your exposure just one day a week. See, 1/7 of your dose is cut. So it is the dose that matters, not the exposure per se. So what I'm saying is exposure is inevitable, but to reduce their effect, you need to reduce your exposure through various remedies and interventions.
Thank you, everyone. We'll take a few moments and take questions from the audience. I know we're running pretty late there. So, who has the mic, if you may, please.
Hi, guys. My name is John. I graduated from Miami. My dad graduated from Miami. Actually, the job that I'm working at now is for a company called AirMax, and one of the things that I wanted to point out, which you guys kind of hinted on, was indoor air quality and basically its importance. earlier you said something about, can you test the air? It is possible, but okay, so now I tested it and it has all these allergens or all these causes, and what do I do with it? Why do I do with it? Basically, one of the things that I wanted to point out was, who is your mechanical contractor? Who is your chief engineer? Who is your architect? The architect would make sure that there's enough air quality going to the designated space, such as your office. How much time are you spending in your office? What is the carpeting in your office? And I noticed that those two issues basically really promote poor indoor air quality for your lungs and everything else. I just wanted to point that out to you guys, and I hope that helps.
Well, can I add a couple of things to your point? You said, know your contractor, their qualification. Those are almost useless. The education has become a joke. Ask why. In our own home, I have certified, qualified engineer that design my air vent, right? They didn't know one simple thing. The kind of the AC system that you have in Miami, we imported that from up north. How do we design our air duct? You have fiberglass, then you have metal outside for insulation purposes. You live in Miami. Humidity increases by 60%. It will condense and suffocate in there. It will cause mold. An ideal design for designing air vent in a place like Miami, it will be other way around. You need to have some material inside, then insulation, and then another material to seal it. So there is one company which I found. They designed even the air handling unit. I designed by myself with my engineer. Said, you cannot do this. You cannot put fiberglass near the air conditioning unit. So I have a stainless steel layer inside, then insulation, then another stainless steel layer. That's how these constructors are working in Miami. They even lack the basic understanding of how to even design a HVAC in a place like Miami.
Amazing. Amazing.
You mentioned the spraying of pesticides for mosquitoes. So my question is, if you know when they're going to spray, how many hours should you stay indoors and keep your windows closed before going out?
So how many hours? On a safe side, what happens, a compound like Nailed, which is an organophosphate compound, you shouldn't be touching any object outside at least 24 hours after the spray. However, when they spray, for example, I'm not sure if you know, when they fly plane, they come very early, 6 o'clock. I have traced these planes down too and recorded with some of the samples. So about 6 hours, you won't see many of the airborne reactant of Nailed. However, that will be maybe still sitting on the places like carpet or your deck, and it's highly corrosive. It can irritate skin, but you won't be breathing if you come out 6 hours after the spray. That's why they come to spray around between 4 and 6 early in the morning. Yeah.
And our last question, unless everyone's okay with a few more questions. Okay, good.
Today, the XL pipeline spilled 200,000 gallons in South Dakota.
What?
It's an alarming event of petroleum spill, which could be a time for action. What is it that we should be doing as a result of learning of this man-made disaster?
I think you're a lawyer, you must go.
Are you asking legally?
Yes.
You all talk about taking action. So the Keystone Pipeline just spilled 200,000 gallons. Doesn't affect us today, but this seems to be the kind of opportunity for people who care about our environment, our health, safety, and wellness to do something. What is it that we in beautiful Paradise, South Florida, should be thinking of doing?
Well, I could just tell you from my perspective, what I would do is I would hire people like Dr. Kumar as my expert, and I would go down there, just like Aaron Brockovich did in the community locally there, and just like I did over in Fort Lauderdale on a case there, and go door to door and talk to the people in the community and see if they want to join in on a lawsuit. And the thing is what you do is you hit them where it hurts. Ben, you know that. You hit them right in the pocketbook, and you sue them, and you make them pay. Because that seems to be the only instant thing that people respond to at this point in time. I mean, we could talk about, like what I was discussing earlier, about it's the students that needs to turn this thing around and make stricter regulations and prevent these things from happening to begin with. But what do we do in the meantime when these disasters occur? The only thing that I could think of doing from my wheelhouse as yours is to hit them where it hurts financially. There is and Dr. Kumar, I'm sure that you could agree with me on this, that the top governmental scientists from NIEHS, Ken Olden was a friend of mine. I had this environmental health summit at the Biosphere 2.
Right.
Ken Olden was appointed by Bush 1, the head of the National Institutes of Health. These scientists need to, what happens is that the public scientists, the ones that work for the government, like NIH and CDC and EPA, what do they do when they leave governmental offices? They go right in the private sector, right?
And their mouth is also shut down too. For example, I have lots of friends at EPA. When you speak to them, if I bring them in any of the research, they will say, we cannot state it.
That's right.
But nonetheless, to add up all what you're saying hit them where it hurts the heart. But that's not true. You know Monsanto,
Okay.
right? So Monsanto's strategy, for example, they say, okay, we will lapse all these legislation because the penalty is much cheaper than fixing the things.
I'm not talking about penalty. I'm not talking about governmental penalties. What I'm talking about is suing them civilly in court for damages. Let's say you get run over by a car. You're injured, okay? But it was due to a defect in the car. But the car is defective because there's some kind of a symbiotic relationship between GM and the government, so they're not fixing the defect. That's okay. You could still sue GM privately and go after them.
Right.
And the symbiotic relationship that's occurring between corporate America and the federal government in this wheelhouse with the scientists going back and forth, you got to follow the money, because that's where it all boils down to, is following the money.
Well,
Do you agree with that, Ben? Do you agree with that?
In some respect, but proving, I think, the doctor from the public health said, proving the cause is very difficult. Yes, when petroleum spills all over, there's something wrong.
Right.
But when we,
Prove the connection.
Well, in that case, see, in your scenario, I believe you can.
we can prove that. That's not a problem. We have much advanced science. We have the most sophisticated science already advanced. It's not we cannot do it. It's the inertia we won't be allowed to do. But with regard to, for example, this farm, right? There is an oil spill. It happened with BP, right? They penalized them. They're happy to pay $1 billion to you. Not a problem. And with regard to proving that they are responsible for it, well, such type of instances won't happen again. They will keep happening over and over again, unless you just ban them. Because these corporates can buy you, your government, and everybody else. They're that rich.
I definitely agree with Dr. Kumar. And I think one of the things you asked what we can do, and part of that is, it's the simple answer to all of those questions is that you have to be, in a sense, politically active. You have to know who in the legislature is going to help in these agencies create those regulations and that legislation that will create the protections for when something like that happens. Because at the end of the day, you have people in the communities that are going to be affected by that problem, and you have to make sure that you have the legal, I guess, the legal, not just the legal avenues, but the legal clout, the legal weapons in order to even fight against BP and to fight against whoever's silencing the scientists. So part of that is also being politically active and making sure that you are voting the correct people in office. So here in Florida, we can make sure that we have that voice. And
The governmental scientists, they're stifled. The corporate scientists, they're stifled. But the academic scientists, like Dr. Kumar, are not. And in my opinion, as I've said in the opening statement, these guys that are on the stage here, these professors, are really the unsung heroes. Not only teaching our students for future generations, but these are, a guy like him, as an expert witness on the stand, I'd hire you in a second. and I'd hire 5 of you.
Well, I understand, but the problem here is people like myself. See, I publish a paper, for example, it may go to the highest ranking journals in Nature or Science. How many of you will read this? Perhaps 0 of you, right? Maybe 1 or 2, right? But let's say if a Monsanto manufacturer say new pesticide saying, hey, it's a little safer than what we were producing, right next day you'll be watching it every single day for 5-6 times on CNN and Fox News, right? How many of you will learn about any knowledge I generate? So in other words, what I'm saying is, with respect to citizen science, the basic knowledge, basic common sense is not reaching to our people, and that's why we're making our kids dumb.
And one last
That's right.
question. Last question.
I don't know if this is a question. I spent a long time as a corporate finance lawyer at Cravath, Swaine & Moore, which lawyers would know, and at Fortune 100, which I will not name. It was in my capacity in that company to be privy to kind of how things work. And one thing they will do, this is all swatting at gnats in a swarm, because the system just perpetuates itself. What we do is we have a big lawsuit, we file Chapter 11, and we just don't pay it. Or we always have a reserve for those pesky little lawsuits from people that are suffering from environmental injury. So the system is set up such that we are going to pursue this and pursue this and pursue this, and this beautiful lawyers like myself, I don't practice anymore, I'm a holistic healer now, and part of what I teach people is what exactly that you're talking about in your book. But the system is the problem, and you touched on it. We have systematic corporate governmental corruption in both parties. It is bipartisan. It is not, don't believe that one party is for the people more than the other, maybe a little bit. But the reality is, because of this revolving door that we've had that is real, nobody is looking out for you in this country. The Europeans have a much better system of protection for us. So in order to get any of this to change, and not the plaintiffs, bar lawyers to make a ton of money from it, and then we're giving a bunch of money to people that are already dying of cancer, it's futile. The only way this will ever change is if we systematically change the system, and that is by rooting out the corruption in our government. And that is the only thing that will change. And then people will listen to those papers.
Well,
But right now they don't.
Just to add what you are saying, it's not the system. We make system. So system begins with you, system begins with me, system begins with all of us. So if we begin to pay attention to small things, then people cannot fool you. Look at the menu of McDonald's today. Did they have ever salad or fruit, let's say 10 years ago? They did not, because their sales began to decline. People want more fruits and vegetables. Now that's in their menu. How did it happen? Because people begin to demand for it. Junk food is bad for you, right? Yeah. Same thing can happen with virtually every consumer product if you don't buy them. And you can buy them when you develop your understanding, your knowledge. If it's not there, dig for it.
That's right.
Right?
It's supply and demand.
Yeah, it's the we, not the system per se, because we make systems. You need to begin from your own home, your own kid. Cook a good meal for your own kids. Don't buy this from anywhere else. Then you will know what ingredient, what kind of chemicals you are feeding them every single day before you regret 20 years after.
Fantastic,
well,
everyone. Thank you. What a riveting discussion that we've had here tonight. We'd like to thank our panel members. Thank you so very much. And I thank you all for spending your evening with us. And good night. Thank you.